Story 1. An empty prison. A single day added onto my sentence meant the difference between a normal jail and the unending nightmare of Pembina prison. I was supposed to get 364 days. That was the deal. But the judge didn't like my attitude, whatever the hell that meant, so he made it 365. Boom! 1 year was the minimum for prison. My lawyer made a stink and a half, but it didn't do any good. It's not his fault. In fact, he's the one who is going to release this statement to the press, or leak it online if the Guardian Corrections Group, GCG, tries to get an injunction on us. People have to know what happened at Pembina prison. I'm going to put it right out there and tell you that it was haunted. You think I'm joking, nuts, or lying, but you have no idea. Haunted prisons aren't anything like you imagine. Those places that advertise themselves and give people tours are sick jokes compared to the real thing. It got so bad that you can actually look up GCG's official filings for Chapter 11. That shit put them out of business on their very first prison, and right there on the briefs, using an early statute of North Dakota law from 1857 to file an insurance claim, it says, "Site of Pembina prison confirmed by Governor's office and 2 notary publics witnessing in person to be afflicted by the supernatural, such that continued business is impossible." It wasn't the first time the prison was closed for that reason either, but leeches kept buying it and reopening it hoping to make a buck off the common man. And I was shoved into that hellhole without knowing the history even a single bit. Don't get me wrong. The building itself wasn't so bad, especially for something straight out of 1853. It was a big stone cube that was squat, heavy, and cramped, but way less sealed off than modern prisons. We could see a lot of the cells around us. There was only one main hallway per floor, and we were close enough to pass things between the bars and have some real human interaction. It could have been worse. There were 5 floors and capacity for 500 prisoners. When I first got there, I had a bunch of cellmates, and I heard there were 2,000 guys locked up, and I believed it, but that soon changed. I didn't talk to anyone for the first 3 weeks. I'd never been to real prison before, and I was messed up over it. I didn't want to accept that I would be in that place and stuck with 3 other guys in my cell for an entire year. The whole prison seemed full of feral men. The bottom floor would start screaming and hollering and panicking in the middle of the night all at once. We were on the top floor, but we could hear their screams echoing through that open old layout like they were right there with us. I just thought the prisoners on the bottom floor were all nuts until the guards weren't there to wake us up the first day of my 4th week. When I woke up in my corner without some asshole guard banging on the bars of our cell, I finally had to talk. I asked one of my cellmates, Dante, what was going on, and I'll never forget the fear in his voice as he said something that should have made us all incredibly happy. "The guards are all gone, man." The prisoners were talking quietly between the cells and loudly between the floors through various whispers and shouts. But the most we could figure out was that something on the first floor had made them all quit in protest. Sure, must have been the crazies screaming like that during the night, right? Except none of US could get any word from the bottom floor. It was dead silent down there. The guys on the second called out for hours. Someone was down there, they said, because they could hear shuffling footsteps walking around at random every so often, but whoever it was never said a single word. That was the first time Dante mentioned the crazy stories from the first floor. He muttered that he hoped none of that was true, but when I asked about it, he just shook his head.
"Naughtin, man."
None of it ever made sense. We were a little worried as the day wore on and nobody came to let us out for breakfast, and then nobody came to let us out for lunch. The time we usually got to spend outside in the yard came and went, and people began getting restless. In the cell to our left, Dante's friend began telling guys to pass the word that we should all calm down and start sharing any food we had holed away. I remember asking Dante, "Is it really that bad?" "They've denied meals and yard time for a day or 2 before," he told me. But the other 2 guys in our cell didn't look convinced. One of them said, "But not like this." They made damn sure we knew what we did. They never just up and left. Someone handed us pieces of crusty old bread through the bars. It was much appreciated. The new guards didn't show up for work for another full day. We got plenty of yard time that day from these new guys, but they seemed more confused than us. We all watched from a distance as Will asked a guard about what happened. The guard shrugged. "I dunno. GCG was paying a premium for fast hires, so I signed up." "What about the prisoners on the first floor?" Will asked. We could still hear him shuffling around down there. We looked on the way out to the yard, but we couldn't see anyone. "Ha!" The guard frowned. "Nobody in there. They all got transferred." "Transferred? The hell's that mean?" "It means Dosa took him back. Returned to state custody since the company couldn't handle them." That made sense. If the floor had been full of nut jobs, then North Dakota's first local private prison company hardly had the experience to handle them. But these new guys didn't even have the skills to handle us. There were half as many guards as before, and they didn't know the routines or who the dangerous ones were among us. As a result, they were distant, scared, and forceful. All except one guy. Kellen. Kellen wasn't the first guard to treat us like human beings, but by then he was the only one around. He traded jokes while in the yard, never hit us, and looked us in the eyes when he talked. He went and found some paperwork to confirm the crazies had actually been transferred, but it took 3 months to get that info out of GCG. By the time he told us he'd heard back, we'd sort of forgotten the whole thing. 2 nights later, maybe 2 hours past lights out, the guys on the second floor began screaming. Dante leapt up and fell on one of our cellmates by accident before shouting, "Shit, shit, must be a fire." Other guys in our row began banging on the bars and shouting for the guards, but the uniforms charged past and headed downstairs without talking to us. We could hear them shouting orders down below, and then yelling in confusion. The prisoners' screams were clearer coming from the second, and it sounded like they were terrified of something in particular and wanted help. The sounds of gates being slammed and people running reached us after about 10 minutes of shouting, and then it was silent. We sat in the dark waiting and listening until morning. When the new shift came in, they were surprised and confused, and Kellen came by to ask what had happened. We told him what we knew, but he'd shown up and found open gates and an empty second floor. There was no indication what had happened, but he promised to check with corporate and figure out if the absent prisoners had all been rapidly transferred again. Dante gripped the bars and made sure Kellen was looking at him. "Please find out who the hell is walking around down there at night." Kellen blinked at that. "I mean, I'm day shift, so I don't know what I can do, but what do you mean?" "The prisoners are gone," Dante told him fiercely but quietly. "But the guys on the third floor said they still hear someone, maybe 2 or 3 someones, shuffling their feet every hour or so, till morning. I guess I could go look right now." Dante reached through the bars and grabbed his uniform, something which usually got us a beating. "Hear me. Do not go in there by yourself. Stay in the stairwell unless someone's with you." Kellen nodded fearfully. It looked like he finally understood how spooked we were. He waved another guard off, and Dante let go. But nothing more came of it for a whole season. The night shift had quit, and more guards got hired at an even higher pay. Kellen and another uniform scoped out the first 2 floors, but found nothing. Dante thought it was because they were looking during the day, but he wasn't about to ask our only friend to risk himself. It was maybe 3 months later. Yeah, I was halfway through my sentence, and I had taken up drawing, so I had a pen and paper, when we woke up in the middle of the night to everyone on the third floor screaming in absolute panic. This time we were less scared during the event itself. Will offered a guard racing past $500 from his commissary account if the man would come back and tell them what was going on. Dante listened intently, trying to hear individual screams from the third floor over everyone else's shouting and confusion. I wrote down any words he thought he heard. What I wrote down:
Jesus Christ.
killing him, God, let us out, coming this way. We weren't as scared when it was happening because we'd lived through it twice before. But this time, the long-term fear was much deeper. Now we knew for sure that it was going to happen again, and any prisoners that had the means began lawyering up and doing everything they could to transfer to other prisons, even if it meant worse conditions. The problem was, the North Dakota prison system was already overflowing, which was the whole reason GCG got started in the first place, so every guy that got out meant it was that much harder for the rest of us. Both of our cellmates transferred, giving us more space, so that was nice, but it was small consolation. Apparently, word had started to spread on the outside, and GCG's solution, instead of paying the guards even more, was to stop having a night shift at all except for just one poor guy. Kellen was a bit miffed he hadn't gotten a raise out of the whole thing, but he was starting to believe us that something was going on. By then, he'd been around a while, and he knew we weren't bullshitters, and too many other prisoners had told him they'd heard someone walking around the first, second, and third floors at random during the night. It was just a few steps, sometimes as many as 20, but it only happened every so often, and only once it had been long enough that you thought it had stopped for good. One guy on the fourth floor said he'd heard a full run from one end of the third floor hallway to the other, clear enough that he'd expected a guard to come charging up the stairwell, but nobody had appeared. He slit his wrists and got transferred out on medical leave the next day, so we took him serious. All that was enough to get Kellen to start doing some research on the outside. He came to us in the 7th month of my sentence with a pale face. Beside us at the bars, Will asked, "What's the word?" Kellen seemed grim. "Lot of bullshit out there, but this place is mentioned a lot. It's been closed before, but I keep getting stonewalled when I ask for the historical documents. Thing is, I don't think the prison itself is the problem. Get this." He pulled out a notepad for reference. 2 Canadian priests, Fathers Norbert Provencher and Severe Dumoulin, visited Pembina in 1818, before it was even an official township. That was back when the Hudson's Bay Company was big around these parts. That's how long ago it was. Pembina was the biggest town in North Dakota then, so the trading post was full, so the priests chose to sleep outside by where the Pembina River meets the Red River. The folk tale has it that a vision of a rotting woman came in the night and stole Provencher's life. The 2 men bartered with her to split the remaining life between them, consigning both to live only 35 more years instead of the 70 Severe had left. Severe got an extra month and 20 days as a gift from his friend for his sacrifice. He paused, as if we might guess the obvious outcome. They both died 35 years later. I knew Pembina Prison had a horrible problem, but that didn't mean I had to believe everything. Let me guess, a month and 20 days apart? Kellen nodded. Dante snorted. "It's true, dude," Kellen insisted. "The dates of death are right there on Wikipedia. But get this. 35 years after 1818 made their death year 1853, the year this prison was built. And the place they camped that night? By the meeting of the rivers. I didn't know what it meant, but I was beginning to feel very uneasy. It's right here, isn't it?" He was dead serious. "I think there's some shit here. Ancient shit. I asked a guy I know. He's got Chippewa relatives over at Turtle Mountain. They know the history of the Red River better than anyone else. He said his uncle told him to never sleep at the meeting of the Red River and the Pembina River. He said something lives here, under the ground, and awakens with the changing of the seasons. We were silent for a beat after that. It was folk-tale nonsense, but it was as good a theory as any. Whatever it was going to come back, and it wasn't friendly. We'll talk to Kellen for another few minutes, but Dante was silent. After he was gone, I asked him, "What's wrong?" He sat on one of the now unused bunks and told me, "I got another 5 years in here, and I got no money for a lawyer. Your sentence will be up before it reaches us, and I'll be here alone." Will it? There was no way to be sure. It'll be back in 2 months for the 4th floor, and then 3 months after that for us. I could get out a week before, or a day too late. It doesn't seem to be exact. He just looked at the floor. What I mean is, I do hope you get out before it comes. Oh. I wasn't sure what else to say after that, so I just sat in my corner like I always did. It wasn't too much after that we heard GCG was going under. The mad rush of transfers had pissed off the state and lost the company a vital contract for a second location, and investors had pulled out or something. The number of guards was cut, then slashed, and Kellen took a pay hit to stay on as the only guy on the day shift. "There's only 2 prisoners left on the 4th floor," he told the 20 of us remaining as the general week we expected it to happen approached. "I feel like I should stay late just to see what the hell is going to go on down there, but the former guards I ask about it are all terrified as hell and refuse to talk. Some got violent just because I asked." "It's cool," Will told him. "You got a kid at home. Don't be here for it." The 20 of us left on the 5th floor sat in our cells once night fell, praying and listening. On Monday night, nothing happened. The 2 guys down below occasionally shouted up to us that everything was clear. On Tuesday night, nothing happened. The strain was growing though, and we could sometimes hear them breathing rapidly down there. I could only imagine the adrenaline rushing through them every minute until dawn. On Wednesday night, nothing happened. Yet, something had changed in the air. The prison was much quieter now that 2,000 men had become 22, and I thought I could feel a subtle sort of heartbeat in the air, pounding against reality like it was a thin sheet of paper. "It's just your imagination," Dante whispered. None of us were willing to speak louder than that. On Thursday night, that heartbeat became a feeling of footsteps approaching from a great distance. "Guys!" Will shouted from his cell. "You good down there?" "Still here," one responded from down below. "But I can feel it. It's at the door. It's knocking. What the hell's that supposed to mean?" But the man below did not respond. Friday night. That was the night it would happen. All day, the 2 guys on 4th pulled and clanged on their bars, begging to be let out. Kellen was torn. After 2 hours of listening to that pleading, he came up with an idea, and transferred both of them up to our floor. "If nobody's on 4, he said happily, "then we'll all be safe, right?" Out loud, we agreed, but we were kidding ourselves. When the night guard showed up, he freaked, and took the 2 men back down. He said out loud what we were all thinking. "If nobody's on 4, then it'll just come right to 5 and get us all." What the hell was Kellen thinking? We had to listen to hours of sobbing that evening. It was the hardest trial of my life. I wanted to call out to the night guard. I wanted to ask him to get those men out of there. But if I did, I knew whatever was coming would find all of us instead. The moment it happened was like a cold hand on my shoulder. "What's going on down there?" Dante shouted. The man who was not sobbing called back. It's changing," Will demanded. "What's happening? Tell us." "It's red. Red. It's red." "What's red?" Will yelled insistently. "God damn it, what's red?" We stared down the hallway at the night guard, who stood listening with fear. The screaming began a few seconds later. This time, only 1 floor above. We could clearly hear their every word. The sobbing prisoner shrieked, "There! It's there!" The man who'd been communicating with us began incoherently raging with fear against his bars. Then, strangely, he stopped. The 20 of us clung to our bars, unable to help, unable to flee. Many of us cried, but we were otherwise silent. for to yell would be to drown out the last words of the men below. But they were eerily quiet for nearly 2 hours. We waited in strained silence as random footsteps traversed the 4th floor every so often. What was happening? For the first time, the victims of whatever was going on down below had chosen to be quiet instead of yelling for help. Why would that make things different? At long last, the sobbing man broke the silence. "Oh my God, it's coming your way. Shut up. It'll see you. Distract it. Hit your bars." The sound of clanging echoed up the stairwell. The sobbing man said with terror, "It knows. It knows. Jesus Christ, do something." We were no longer silent. We echoed that sentiment, loudly and repeatedly to the guard. "Do something." He just stood there, literally quaking in his boots. Will screamed at him, "Snap out of it." The other guards and prisoners got away. You can too. Whatever it is, it won't follow you if you let them out and leave. I shouted. "They're gonna die down there." Dante threw his shoe, and the impact finally snapped the man out of his terror. The guard ran to the stairwell and descended. The first thing we heard him say was a taken aback, "Mary, Mother of Christ." The sobbing man again, "Over here. For God's sake, let us out." The other prisoner wasn't talking for some reason. We could hear his gasping terror, but that too went quiet. Then we heard a buzzer, and all the gates on 4 slammed loudly open. The sounds of panting, running, and someone dragging something followed. The prison went silent, and just like that, we were alone again. The formerly crowded prison now felt terrifyingly large and empty, with only 20 of us and no guards. That night, the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoed from down below. I counted time as best I could. 40 minutes. Then someone took 3 steps out of a cell and into the hallway. An hour and 6 minutes. Someone ran 10 steps along the hallway and stopped abruptly. 28 minutes. The footsteps approached the stairwell, but then turned into a cell and went silent. Thing was, whoever it was sounded barefoot, and the starting and stopping locations did not match. Where they ended was often nowhere near where they began again later. By the time dawn came, we were scared into motionless, terrified silence, and it took Kellen's arrival for us to begin stirring again. With GCG in bankruptcy court, we no longer had a night guard at all. If it came for us, there would be nobody to let us out of our cells like everyone else. We hardly talked. We hardly ate. Each passing day was a grain of sand falling through an hourglass marking our executions. Our fellows began confessing to crimes they hadn't even committed just to get transferred to Supermax out of state. The only option left. Well, that, and suicide attempts. One by one, Kellen escorted or dragged guys out of our floor. 20 became 15, then 10. Then it was just me and Dante, with Will still in the cell to our left. The 3 of us and Kellen, for men waiting for doom. We sat playing card games in the weeks leading up to it. It would be 1 full year for me in that place, but I could swear I'd spent a lifetime in that cell. I couldn't think, couldn't remember life before. Couldn't imagine surviving after. Every day, I prayed for a transfer to come in, but North Dakota had gotten sick of our shit, and the judges had stopped hearing cases from Pembina Prison. They didn't know there were only 3 of us left. Nobody knew. We contacted the media. We phoned the governor's office. We made a ruckus. That was worse than nobody knowing. It turned out nobody cared. 2. There was nobody higher up at GCG following the situation, and Kellen couldn't get anybody on the phone. Payroll, meaning just his paycheck, was being handled by a third-party disbursement company that couldn't answer questions about ongoing proceedings. The week approached. On Monday night, nothing happened. We were like statues in our cells, alone, waiting for a sign of the executioner's approach. When dawn came, We sighed and began moving again. Dante asked, "You get out Friday?" I nodded. If things went like before, I would be released the day of. As long as I left before sundown, I would be all right. On Tuesday night, nothing happened. 2 for 2. Just one more. Just one more day. I sat through that darkness until, no, the feeling of the prison had changed around us. A subtle heartbeat seemed to pulse against our faces and ears and eyes. It had come a day earlier in the week than the last time. That morning, Will patted my arm as we both leaned out the bars.
Sorry, man.
Dante just shook his head angrily. I wasn't going to get out in time. On Wednesday night, the heartbeat became the sound of footsteps approaching from some unfathomable distance. I think I stood at the bars of our cell that entire day, fingers wrapped around metal with force to match the tension in the air and in our minds. This couldn't happen. This wouldn't happen. My lawyer would walk in and tell me he'd gotten the judge's unfair addition of an extra day removed. One day. One goddamn day. Even if I'd spent the whole year in this prison, one day still meant life or death. Let me out. Let me the hell out. For God's sake. But nobody cared, and nobody would listen. I'd like to tell you that Kellen stayed late that night. I'd like to tell you that when the entire floor began to glow red, the hallway, the cells, the stone itself as whatever ungodly abomination in the earth began to wake upon the changing of the season, as distant footsteps became a traveller at the door of our minds. I'd like to tell you that Kellen was there and hit the button and opened the gates and let us all out. I'd like to tell you that I didn't see anything, and that I'm not permanently a broken man. I didn't claw at the walls of my cell as it approached slowly, moving a few steps every 20 to 70 minutes. I'd like to tell you that all three of us were able to run away and escape that horror upon reality, with its rotting hands and blind eyes radiating crimson light as it searched for us at random. But I can't give you a satisfying end to this story. The disbursement company fired Kellen and changed the locks on the property. According to their paperwork, all the prisoners had been moved, and they thought he'd been getting paid for guarding an empty prison. They left us in there for 11 days before the error was found, which meant 11 nights with that thing. For 11 days, we starved. For 11 nights, we sat absolutely still, not daring to move or breathe or even look left or right. It knew where we were, generally. It stood right outside our cells for hours, and sometimes walked right through the bars and grasped at the beds around us, daring us to make even the slightest motion. When you've spent 6 hours staring into the blind crimson eyes of a rotting demon, unable to blink your eyes for fear that it will hear the air your lashes move, when you've seen what it's seen, the worlds it has walked reflected in hellish red, you'll understand. No one cares. I'd like to tell you that Kellen actually existed. I'd like to tell you we had a friend among the guards, and that it wasn't all bad. I'd like to tell you I wasn't traumatized by the hell I went through being left to rot, and left to die as nothing more than a number on some corporation's books. But no one cares. Story 2. Who's the worst, most despicable person you can think of? Jeffrey Dahmer? Ted Bundy?
Luis Garavito?
Pol Pot? Of course, you could make your own arguments for any one of them, or anybody else for that matter. Yet, all of these people have one thing in common. They're human. Preposterous people trying to act like monsters, either due to lofty, ridiculous ideals or some primal urge to revolt against society as a whole. It's quite the bizarre phenomenon. Yet, none of these admittedly sick people have truly fallen into the abyss. Perhaps they've stared down into it, dipped their feet in, but none of them have taken the plunge as a whole. Despite their efforts, they weren't able to separate themselves from their inherent humanity. But that's a good thing. They were relatively easy to take down. The bad news is that every once in a while, special cases will arise. In our circles, we call these individuals the void people, or just the voids. Individuals so far gone that they can hardly be considered humans anymore. The cause behind entities like these? Well, I wouldn't know. Nobody really does. Maybe they were born with that latent potential. Maybe they underwent some obscure supernatural transformation. Maybe their experiments gone awry. Aliens from another planet. Shit. Maybe they're literal demons from hell brought here by some fool who just had to conduct some fucked up ritual. Who the hell knows? The only detail that matters is the fact that they exist, and dealing with them is more than a bitch. I'm sure you're familiar with the concept of max security prisons, places where drug kingpins, terrorists and prolific serial killers etc. are sent. The places meant to contain the worst amongst humans. Well, those are a joke compared to where the voids are kept. At a pair of undisclosed coordinates built in the underground of a tiny island somewhere deep in the Atlantic, there exists a prison unlike anything you could imagine. We simply call it the Chasm, a penitentiary for pure, unbridled evil. A collective evil that would surely yield humanity's extinction in a couple of months if it were allowed to run rampant in the world. Let me emphasize this a bit further. The individuals that require being held there are not merely criminally insane. They are criminally absolutely out of this universe fucking bonkers. Of course, you wouldn't know about any of this. Why would you? The government would probably sacrifice 1,000 children before they divulge a single detail about the place to a person without high enough clearance. But you know, that's just how they are. Before I came, there were exactly 32 being confined there, save for 2 that were still being actively pursued through the Brazilian underground and Russian tundra respectively. That was about all of them in the world. At least, we assumed that was all of them. Can't be sure about anything these days. Each holding cell was fortified to hell, specifically designed to counter and contain the respective void they were holding. If they managed to escape, there were 8 drones armed with Gatling guns, blades, grenades and rockets waiting for them within a larger chamber. If they managed to break through that, then 20 guards in mechanized suits would have to step in. However, everybody understood the futility of that protocol. Those guards were getting slaughtered in seconds, regardless of the void they went up against. Maybe minutes if they're really skilled. Honestly, I'm not entirely sure why any of us regular guards are stationed here at all. Bureaucracy, I guess? Who knows what the government's thinking? If the situation were to ever get too drastic, then there was really only one feasible countermeasure in place. A last resort, so to speak. The higher-ups would have to call in something known as Task Force Void Nova Hammer, or TFVNH for short. I've never seen them in action before, nor do I know much about them. Not that I really want to, though. If you ever find yourself witnessing them in person, then that must mean you're having a bad day. So why am I disclosing all of this uber-classified information that would either get me killed or thrown in the deepest hole conceivable for the rest of my short life? Well, I'd estimate that there's about a 90% chance that I'm going to die by the end of today. And even if I do make it out of this fiasco, my life's never really going to be the same. So fuck it. Here we go. My day started out more or less normal. I was part of the unit guarding somebody named Jim Henninger. Well, that was his real name. Doesn't evoke a lot of fear, does it? That's why he had to call him something else. Since he used to be some psychosurgeon or something, we've dubbed him the Surgeon. Really creative stuff, I know. Standing at 5 feet 7 inches, 171 centimeters, 135 pounds, 61 kilograms, we were all required to memorize their physical stats. He doesn't look like much. However, if you ever find yourself in the same room with him, no matter how big and tough you are, you're getting dissected or something. The main danger surrounding him stems from the fact that he seems to be able to teleport on will. 1 second you'll be staring at his dark, lifeless eyes, and after one blink, he'll disappear in a cloud of black haze, only to end up breathing right down your neck. For that reason, there's got to be at least 10 sets of eyes on his monitor at all times. There's no way around it. If he's not being watched, he will escape. He's also kind of unkillable. No matter how many bullets you put through his head or blades you plunge into his chest, the guy just won't croak. And once he gets a scalpel in his hands, oh boy, of course, he's just 1 out of 32, and comparatively speaking, on the tamer side. With that said, my guard shift ended without any incident. Routine stuff. Following that, I went on break in the lunchroom with my buddy Sond who. Our conversations were usually pretty dry, but at least I can talk to the guy. It's hard to get along with any of the other guards. They're all just weird, in one way or another. Anyway, lunch was usually the most enjoyable part of a working day in the chasm. What I didn't enjoy was the blaring fucking alarm and deafening, repeating automated voice blasting the word breach that went off right as I was about to take my chili out of the microwave. I could see Sondhu's face drop at the disturbance. "You're fucking kidding me," he mouthed. Now, I'd only ever experienced one minor breach up until that point, and it was from the surgeon. I guess none of us were paying any attention that day. He made it about 8 miles off the coast using a stolen boat, racking up a total body count of 145 in his wake. It took 3 full days to wrangle him back, and 4 more weeks to fix all the damage he'd done to the infrastructure. That was all just one prisoner. If we were dealing with 3 or more, then our combined efforts as guards wouldn't have stood a semblance of a chance. There had only ever been one major breach in the chasm's history, in which 8 voids had broken out nearly simultaneously. It was also apparently the only time that TFVNH had to step in. This was all around 12 years ago, long before I became a guard myself. The aftermath of that, I don't have high enough clearance to know, but I'm willing to bet that it was nothing fun. We did have a breach procedure. It was a lengthy document, outlining exactly what we were supposed to do and where we were supposed to go. I've read it before, and it's fucking garbage. It's essentially predicated on the idea that we're cannon fodder, and that we're obligated to do whatever we can to contain the prisoners. If anybody actually followed the procedure, they'd die instantly. Well, what the hell are we supposed to do? Somebody asked. They only got shrugs in response. Except for Saw-Sun, that is. I fucking hated Saw-Sun. The guy seems to believe that his life's an action movie, and that he's the invincible main protagonist. "Are y'all pussies or what?" he screamed at the top of his lungs, with a stupid grin plastered across his face. "We never get any fucking action. Let's fucking go." Before anybody could stop him, he picked up his rifle and swung the door open like the giant fucking dumbass he is. Since the alarm was blaring, we could hardly hear anything that was going on outside in the corridors. For that reason, we all rather shocked upon seeing Morgie the corgi standing right outside. Imagine some guy walking around wearing a dirty, giant, creepy dog costume. Now imagine that this guy is 7 feet 2 inches, 218 centimeters, with a voice that's simultaneously deep, raspy, and childish. That's Morgie the corgi for you. I could see the bravado leaving Sawson's face the moment he laid eyes on the abomination in person. We'd only ever seen him through a screen before. Rough. I always hated it when people tried imitating dogs. But hearing it coming from Morgie was a bit different and a lot worse. Before Saw-Sun could even put his finger on the trigger, his head was mashed into pulp. Morgie began pouncing on other guards, effortlessly crushing limbs with his oversized paws. He'd switch between running around on his feet and crawling on all fours. The last thing I saw before running out of the break room was Morgie forcing the remaining horrified agents to play fetch with him using a stray arm. But of course, It's not like I managed to escape anywhere better. The entire place was in a fucking tizzy. The squad leaders were frenetic, attempting to scrap together some kind of suppression force. I couldn't understand why they were so delusional. Are we guards supposed to be badass? Fuck yeah. Due to our field prowess, we were specifically selected from the existing pool of CIA agents and military personnel to be dropped into this godforsaken place. Put us up against a trafficking militia, terrorists, etc., and we'll smoke them. But what we can't deal with are things that aren't supposed to exist in the first place. We watch creature features and slasher flicks with the inherent understanding that we're watching fiction, a type of visual catharsis for our inherent fascination with the dark and grim. It's not supposed to be real, and we have no idea how to act once we find it standing right in front of our faces. Not even us so-called elite agents. Like I said, I'm not sure why they even bothered keeping guards in the chasm to begin with. These were the thoughts that ran through my head as I bolted through the hellish corridors. At one point, I stumbled upon a crowd of guards leering over some rails. Shockingly, they didn't seem concerned in the slightest. "What the hell are you guys looking at?" I asked them. A guard I recognized as Fenton turned around. "This is gonna be sick." He grinned, gesturing for me to look below. I didn't even know where I was going, so I didn't realize that I'd wandered into the level right above the weight room. It was a sprawling gym with an abundance of the best equipment obtainable. But there was one guard that used it the most, Branko Petrovic, a Serbian-American whose oversized frame hardly makes any fucking sense. I swear, when I first met the guy, he couldn't have been over 7 feet. He's around 8 feet 2 inches, 249 centimeters. Now, I'm not quite sure what kind of bizarre experiments they ran on him, but they sure as hell overdid it. Despite the alarms, he was in the middle of overhead, pressing what appeared to be an ungodly amount of weight when one of the escaped voids wandered onto the weight room floor. It was Luz, standing at 6 feet 2 inches, 188 centimeters, 205 pounds, 93 kilograms. Like all the other prisoners, the guy was a complete mystery. His mostly bare body was comparable to that of a bodybuilder's, save for the hundreds of gnarly scars decorating his skin. The more disconcerting part of his aesthetic was the fact that he only had one half of his face. The other half consisted of his exposed skull, with some kind of red, electrical current running through his cranial bones. He had that same current running through his hands, which allowed him to savagely electrocute whatever organic material he touched, quickly rendering it into a pile of steaming, black mush. I guess that my fellow agents didn't bother reading up on the prisoners they guarded, because Branko never stood a chance. It didn't matter if you were superior to Luz in terms of strength. One touch and you were gone for. The only practicable way to take him down was by using ranged weapons, and even then, that task was easier said than done. Branko grunted like the dumb meathead he is, before grabbing an Olympic weightlifting plate and chucking it like a frisbee at Luz. It connected, seemingly shattering his ribs. But it wasn't nearly enough to take him down. As soon as he rushed forward, the fight had been decided. Branko attempted to tackle him, a mistake so horrible that his whole body began twitching as his skin made contact with Luz's fingertips. The electricity spread through his giant frame, causing his vitals to shut down within seconds. In no time at all, he was reduced to a heaping mass of scorched flesh on the floor. He didn't even have time to scream. I could see the respective faces of my stunned colleagues drop as they witnessed what they likely deemed an improbable outcome. Idiots, that's what they were. But truth be told, I was also an idiot for even bothering to stay. Not long after, the sounds of cracking bones and heavy footsteps began emanating from an adjacent walkway. Along with the rest of the agents, my gaze shifted towards what was sure to be another incoming menace. The locked, metal door to the corridor was suddenly dented from the other side. A big fucking dent, mind you. It only took one more blow to blast it off its hinges completely. Standing at 6 feet 6 inches, 198 centimeters, 242 pounds, 110 kilograms, and arriving in a haze of blood, guts and limbs was the slasher flick-esque killer, colloquially known as Wirehead. In congruence with his name, his entire head, save for a single eye, was wrapped in rusty barbed wire. He wore a decrepit, old leather jacket and jeans, complete with a large pompadour on top, like an 80s, or whatever, high school delinquent. Everybody's main concern was the weapon in his hands. A large iron bat wrapped in the same barbed wire on his head. If you didn't die from the impact, unlikely, the subsequent infection would surely get you. And don't ask us why we didn't take his weapon away when we contained him. We did. But somehow, someway, he got it back. These things really can't be helped. What the hell is going on? I thought. Breaches happened, sure. But it seemed as if every single fucking void had somehow escaped. How is that possible? In any case, I couldn't afford to think deep into it at the moment. As Wirehead began mowing down the mystified agents in his way, I found myself accidentally making eye contact with Luz from below. I nearly had a heart attack as I began pushing through the crowd. Even though I was implicitly certain of the fact that no other location within the chasm would have been much safer, I was still being driven ahead by my fight-or-flight responses, away from the immediate threat. It was kind of funny. I'd been through so many life-or-death experiences that my reaction to adrenaline coursing through my veins had been dulled. Well, it sure as hell got invigorated today. I guess that I wasn't paying enough attention to my surroundings, because right as I was about to climb a staircase, I felt an oversized arm slam into my chest, knocking me over in the process. I looked up to see another guard, Cade, leering down at me. Sure, I was happy it wasn't one of the voids, but Cade wasn't much more pleasant. "What are you running for?" He shot me a smug grin. "This is a breach, isn't it? Why don't we do our jobs here and fix it?" "Oh, fuck off." I spat at him, before trying to duck past. No luck there. He caught me by the collar and slammed me into a wall. He certainly had the weight advantage. Still, I didn't practice hand-to-hand combat just to be ragdolled by some asshole. I slammed my elbow down on his wrist, which managed to loosen his grip. I followed up with a knee to the stomach, and then attempted to strike his neck. But then he caught my wrist mid-punch. "Nice moves," he said, in an obnoxiously sarcastic tone. He took his palm and rammed into my chin, nearly causing me to black out. In the meantime, Wirehead was getting closer. "Guess we'll have to take this up another time," he said. "Somebody's got to work around here." I had no idea what he was thinking trying to take on one of the voids, but I wasn't trying to see his delusions through in person. Still in pain from his palm strike, I pulled myself up and began running once more, all while the sounds of carnage escalated around me. But there was a glaring issue. I had no idea where I was going. The exits were surely going to be blocked off from the inside. "Do we have some kind of safe room?" I thought to myself.
No.
Of course we didn't. We were entirely expendable. They 100% expected us to fight these things head-on, even though there was zero fucking chance of victory on our side. There was only thing I could do here: survive until TFVNH showed up. Obviously, that wasn't any kind of guaranteed reprieve, but my options were slim. Nevertheless, something rather surprising transpired. Amidst the cacophony of frenetic orders from our superiors, a familiar voice snuck in through my radio. "Hey, Jason, you alive?" It was Sond Hu. I picked up my radio and isolated his transmission. "Yeah, where are you, man? Block C." Got lucky and found something weird. It might save us, though. Come on. Obviously, there wasn't much information there, but it was better than running around aimlessly. Thankfully, Block C was fairly close, so I was able to make it without running into another void. However, when I got there, it was still as chaotic as ever. I swiveled my head around, trying to spot Sondhu. I yelled into my radio, but his response was drowned out by everything around me. As I searched, I began sensing a perplexing, sinister pressure that made it feel as if I was sinking into the concrete beneath me. I hardly had to guess the source. It was Diaxec, 9 feet 5 inches, 287 centimeters.
LBS KG.
Diaxec was comparable in appearance to something you'd see in the corner of your room during sleep paralysis. A hulking, faceless figure wearing a sweeping black robe that jerked around in unsettling motions as he, or she, who knows, walked. I wasn't sure how he actually killed people, mind you. As soon as anybody got within a certain distance to him, they'd freeze in place and begin bleeding from their eyes. And then, they'd just stay that way forever. Obviously, that wasn't something I was looking forward to. As I looked ahead, I could see some unfortunate guards already getting caught in his death zone. In an attempt to avoid a similar fate, I turned the opposite direction and began running, and then I nearly shit myself. Standing about 10 feet away was the undead Nazi, 5 feet 8 inches, 173 centimeters, 143 pounds, 65 kilograms. His name essentially told it all. A man wearing a dirty and tattered SS uniform, with a cracked gas mask covering his face. In one hand, he gripped his signature Kampfmesser 42 blade that was inexplicably unbreakable, no matter what the hell we tried doing to it. In the other, he held a flamethrower hose connected to a massive tank on his back, which sprayed out some kind of scorching, black flame that would supposedly yield pain beyond comprehension if you were ever to come into contact with it. You could say that I was stuck in between a rock and a hard place here. The only other way out was taking the plunge over the rail in front of me, onto a mass of scrambling bodies 50 feet below. Before I considered simply saying my prayers, I felt a hand tug at my sleeve from the side, giving me another heart attack. But this time, it was good news. For once, I looked over to see Sond, who poking his head out from what appeared to be some kind of hidden door in the wall. "Let's fucking go," he whisper-shouted before pulling me in. He closed the door behind him, plunging us into complete darkness. "What the hell is this place?" I asked, hardly expecting a detailed response. Sond, who illuminated his face using his phone's flashlight. "Couldn't tell you, but it's kind of fucking crazy." I could hear the Nazi beginning to spray his flamethrower from out in the corridor. I suddenly wondered whether or not Diaxec's power would apply to other voids. In any case, it was better not to be in such close vicinity to them, so I followed Sond, who. He led me down some kind of hidden hallway. The walk was rather long, maybe around 8 minutes, and I eventually found myself in what appeared to be some kind of surveillance/control room. It was still dark, but there was an array of monitors giving off enough light to comfortably navigate around. But here's the strange thing. The place looked kind of haphazard. No chance it was being used by the higher-ups. The monitors were scattered around, connected by a mess of wires to multiple outlets spread throughout the room. There was also only one chair. "I guess this is beyond explaining," I said. "Yeah."
No shit,
Sond, who replied, before gesturing towards the monitors. "Check it out. What the fuck did we just find?" I took the suggestion, letting my eyes drift over to the screens. What I saw would have been normal in any other scenario. Each monitor was streaming a different section of the prison, all displaying the utter carnage that was going on outside. The guards were being ripped to shreds. Some tried fighting. Most were running. But what they had in common was the fact that they were all being utterly obliterated by the voids. I could see the surgeon giving somebody a forced lobotomy, grinning like hell while doing so. At the same time, Morgie was chewing on a severed head like a toy. But then I caught something interesting on a screen below. It was Wirehead and Luz, staring each other down. That's when a rather obvious revelation hit me. Of course the voids weren't only going to kill the guards. They were sure as hell going after each other as well. That much should have been apparent from the beginning. I grinned, feeling some kind of obscure hope creeping into my system. That hope was only bolstered when I saw the Nazi utterly dousing Diaksek with a relentless wave of black flames, with the latter struggling to move forward as a result. Guess these bastards can be hurt after all, I thought to myself. But of course, my hope was merely transitory. I wasn't gonna kid myself. Even if only one void was left standing at the end of everything, that just means it'll be the strongest one out of them all. And we can't stay in here forever. At this point, my future is uncertain at best. Maybe I'll get lucky. Probably not. But in the meantime, I suppose I'll enjoy the show. See how things turn out. This place sure gives you the creeps, doesn't it? I couldn't disagree with Sondhu's assessment of the bizarre room we found ourselves in. The monitors only illuminated the area up until a certain point. However, we couldn't see any walls, which meant the place had to be bigger than what could be seen, either by a little or a lot. We couldn't know unless we decided to venture further into the darkness. Neither of us took that initiative, though, keeping it a mystery. Still, it didn't feel like anybody was in there with us, so we allowed ourselves to relax a bit. I took the first sitting shift, lying back in the chair and focusing on the monitor that I deemed most interesting at the moment. Wirehead versus Luz. Who was I rooting for? None of them. Nevertheless, I was morbidly eager to see these two horrific titans square off. Among us guards, we'd created an unofficial tier system, ranking each respective void in terms of the estimated threat that they posed. In comparison to each other, the tiers went as such: tornado, weakest; tsunami, hurricane, mid; earthquake, asteroid, highest; imminent death, get the fuck out. They were also divided into subdivisions: high, low, mid, etc. With that said, Luz was around a high tornado, while Wirehead was a mid-tsunami. A glaring difference between them, but not enough that would make it impossible for Luz to win. "Wanna make a bet?" I asked Sondhu, half jokingly. He chuckled. "You know my luck's cursed, but I guess if we don't make it out of here alive, then my debt's null anyway." Luz was more of a defensive combatant, so it wasn't surprising when Wirehead initiated the conflict. He twirled his bat around, still with remnants of guard flesh clinging onto it, in a near-mocking fashion at Luz. He was a delinquent, after all. Luz hardly reacted, of course. That's just the way he was. In response, he stepped forward, electricity flickering through his hands and up to his forearms. Wirehead followed suit, unleashing a big swing at Luz's head, which he managed to intercept with one of his forearms. Nevertheless, the wires still pierced his skin. Wirehead followed it up with a headbutt. This time, it connected with the flesh side of Luz's face, slicing him up rather gruesomely. But despite his seemingly grievous injuries, he remained unwavering. That was the thing about Luz. He was incapable of feeling any pain. Like I said, his exact origins remained a mystery, but the one thing we knew about him for sure was the fact that he hailed from some kind of ancient clan residing in the Arctic Circle. In fact, he was the sole survivor of an incident that decimated his village, and he was hungry for revenge against the unknown force that did it. After taking the headbutt, Luz was now in striking range. He formed his fingers into an arrow shape and drove them into Wirehead's solar plexus, before electrocuting his insides. Wirehead quaked in pain as he swung his bat in a frenzied rage, just about demolishing Loser's ribcage. No reaction from him, though. Instead, he took his other hand and wrapped it around Wirehead's neck. Any normal person would have succumbed to Loser's electrical shocks after a few seconds. But of course, Wirehead was no normal person, despite blood pouring out from chest wound and the skin on his neck beginning to bubble. He picked Lose up by the torso and slammed him over the steel railing. He fucking broke his back. Even without sound, the mental audio of a spine snapping reverberated throughout my mind. Unsurprisingly, Lose didn't bat an eye. Wirehead went in for the kill, tossing Loser's body onto the ground before smashing until it resembled nothing more than a mess of bloody pulp and broken bones. But somehow, he was still alive. Among the gruesome pile, I could see an eye blink. Once Wirehead had exhausted himself from his relentless swinging, Lose took his chance. Using his one arm that hadn't been smashed to bits, he crawled over and grabbed Wirehead by the foot, before scaling himself up to his neck. Once there, he drilled his fist into Wirehead's forehead, utterly shredding his own hand in the process. In the end, it was worth the sacrifice. He was able to electrocute Wirehead's brain, finally causing the behemoth to drop. So, I guess he won. Sondhu said. I guess. I had my own reservations about calling Loser's performance a victory. By the end of it, all of his limbs and his spine had been shattered, and not an inch of his body wasn't hosting a series of deep cuts. The good side of his face had also been chipped away to the skull, leaving only his eye and half his nose intact. And yet, he didn't move with a hint of desperation or concern, calmly crawling away from the scene using his one mangled hand. I could still see the current flowing through it as well, a telltale sign that he was ready to pick up another fight. Nice. Comeback victory, Sondhu said. I don't see him making it far, though. Not as a tornado tier. Yeah, but we made all of that shit up. Not like it means anything. I responded. Truth be told, I was nearly rooting for Lose at the end there. Something about his resilience resonated with me, as bizarre as it may seem. I scanned the rest of the monitors. While Wirehead and Lose were squaring off, the undead Nazi had burnt Diaxec to a crisp. On another monitor, Morgie playing around with a void corpse that I recognized as Death Shadow. He chose his own name. 3 down. I muttered to myself. Fuck, we got a big one coming up, Sondhu announced. I followed his eyes to a monitor near the bottom of the room. He was right. This one was gonna be good. Standing at opposite sides of the kitchen were
Trench, 6'3", 190 cm, 330 lbs, 150 kg.
and
Senju, 510, 177 cm, 148 lbs, 67 kg.
Trench was a silent entity dressed entirely in ancient-looking deep-sea diving gear, except for the head, which remained without a helmet. However, you couldn't get a glimpse of its face regardless. That was due to the fact that his features were completely distorted, so much so that if you tried focusing on the details, all you were getting was a nasty migraine. On top of that, he was invisible in person. Let me explain. If he was standing right in front of you, you wouldn't be able to see him. The only way to get a glimpse of him was through secondary means, cameras, mirrors, etc., which made him all the more dangerous. As for how he killed people, it was either by brute force using his monstrous strength or be his death aura, as us guards have dubbed it. Similar to Diaxec's zone, once you were in his close vicinity, you'd feel an astronomical amount of pressure and get crushed on the spot, comparable to what you'd feel standing at the bottom of the ocean. But that's only if Trench wills it. Sometimes, he'll turn the aura off, and simply punch somebody's head off. For that reason, he was in the mid-hurricane tier. As for Senju, well, he was basically a psychotic, demon-possessed martial artist with supernatural levels of speed, strength, and agility. He apparently trained in the Wraith style, or the technique beyond human comprehension, whatever the hell those were supposed to mean. When he gets serious, his eyes will roll into the back of his head, and black veins will begin bulging out from underneath his skin. At that point, he'll be moving so fast that his motions become impossible to keep up with visually, and a single punch from him will be enough to completely vaporize a human head. But in all honesty, he's one of the least malicious voids out of the bunch. If you're weak, like us guards, he won't even spare you a glance, granted that you stay out of his way. The only thing that he's really looking for are strong opponents to fight. But when he can't find one, he starts to get antsy, and then problems emerge. We've pegged him at a low hurricane. Can Senju even see trench? Sond who asked. I guess so. I responded. The question was worth asking, but I wouldn't have been surprised if Trench's aura/invisibility simply didn't work on him at all. That seemed to be the case, since Senju decided to strike first. He rushed forward at an unfathomable speed, directing what must have been hundreds of strikes in succession at Trench. However, none of them fazed the obscure diver. I could see Senju's lips curling into a psychotic grin at the fact. He certainly found what he was looking for. The floor beneath him cracked as his eyes turned white, and his grotesque veins began bulging. If we couldn't see his strikes before, it was beyond impossible now. He rushed forward, unleashing a maelstrom of lightning-like punches, elbows and kicks against Trench. This went on for about 5 seconds before he was stopped in his tracks. Trench had grabbed him by the throat, still not looking any worse for wear in the process. I could see Senju mouth something to the effect of, "What the fuck?" before he was tossed into a metal fridge. It certainly appeared as if Trench was too much of a tank for him to handle. Nevertheless, Senju got back up and cracked his shoulder into place while blood leaked from his mouth. And then he seemed to let out a shriek. Crazy fucker, I thought to myself. What the hell did it take for somebody to become like this? At that point, he'd seemingly given up on technique entirely. Instead, he grabbed a handful of kitchen knives and began chucking them at Trench. While none of them pierced the suit, one of them managed to stick in his distorted head, which evidently dealt some damage. Trench flinched before taking the knife out and throwing it back at Senju, who in turn caught it effortlessly. At this point, he was howling in what I assumed was some kind of fucked-up sadomasochistic jubilation. He'd found the weak point. Senju rushed back at Trench, knife in hand, before slashing away at its face. Spurts of vicious, dark blue blood stained the kitchen floor, along with Senju's own face. Soon enough, the knife snapped, and Trench threw a desperation punch at Senju's temple. He managed to block it with his forearm, although I could see his bones cracking from the impact. He leapt back as his arm hung limp to his side, dodging a follow-up haymaker. Throughout everything, a grin remained plastered on his face. His veins were bulging out so hard that I found it hard to believe they weren't going to completely burst altogether. With one arm, Senju lifted a metal table and swung it into the side of Trench's head, nearly taking it off in the process. He wasted no time, grabbing a large frying pan and pouncing at his incapacitated opponent, knocking them both over in the process. He then took a position atop Trench's body, furiously slamming the pan onto his face. Martial arts, eh? I could hear Sond who mutter. After what must have been 250 blows, the pan broke. On the ground, Trench's head had been obliterated no less than 50 strikes prior. Senju tossed the scrap metal aside and looked up at the ceiling, presumably screaming his lungs sore in sheer, combative delight. Well, Looks like our tier system means fuck all. I chuckled. Despite the morbid scene unfolding in front of us, Sond, who shared a laugh with me. We were at the point where the absolute absurdity and danger of the situation was beginning to fade from our senses. Hell, I suppose we were enjoying ourselves, as fucked up as that may sound. We kept watching as Senju got up and stumbled around, evidently disoriented from both his injuries and successive fits of fighting spirit-induced rage euphoria. He took about 4 steps before his head exploded, throwing the two of us watching for quite the loop. Another figure stepped into the frame, whom we recognized as Satanbot, 6 feet 11 inches, 211 centimeters, 535 pounds, 243 kilograms. I felt a shiver crawl down my spine upon seeing him, somewhat snapping me back into reality. Despite his comical name, Satanbot had to be one of the most frightening voids out there. I just couldn't understand what the fuck he was supposed to be. His body appeared to be robotic, but moved in ways that were too fluid for even the most sophisticated android, like legitimate metallic flesh. It was honestly maddening to look at. On top of that, he literally resembled the fucking devil himself. Reddish-black scaly skin/metallic shell, a mouth full of exposed, razor-like teeth, rectangular, slanted crimson eyes, a pair of large, mechanical wings and a long tail ending in something that resembled a 3-pronged spear to boot. For whatever reason, he also had a rocket launcher atop his right shoulder and a Gatling gun connected to his left hand. No, these were not mechanical modifications. They were literally connected to his body. He was unanimously considered one of the most dangerous voids residing in the chasm, rated at a high earthquake. Even if Senju was at his full strength, he wouldn't have stood a chance. "Oh shit," Sond who commented. "I was hoping he didn't escape." "Well, let's not worry about him for now," I said, turning my attention to another monitor. What my eyes landed on next was an utter massacre. Sitting atop a pile of guard bodies that must have eclipsed 6 feet was Hugo Wright, aka the Brutal Bishop, 6 feet 2 inches, 189 centimeters, 200 pounds, 91 kilograms. Like his name indicated, he was dressed in a traditional vicar-priest outfit. The only difference was the fact that the cross he wore around his neck was fashioned out of blades. The man himself had long, sweeping black hair and about 14 bags under both of his dead blue eyes. It was unclear to us what his real motivations were. It's not like he really followed the rules of any religion on earth, despite his outfit. He just went on long rants about the sin of Natalaism and the futility of existence, and how, to reach a state of sanctity, we must first reach a clean state. Basically, he wanted to kill every sentient being on Earth, and then himself. He wasn't all talk, either. He was certainly strong. We rated him at a low hurricane. After praying to whatever fucked up deity he worshipped atop his pile of corpses, he slid down and began stalking the corridors for some more victims to fulfill his holy objective. Who he came across next couldn't have been more perfect.
Kael Silva, AK Vampire Cop, 5'9", 175 centímetros, 176 lbs, 80 kg.
Kael was rather interesting, being that he was one of the most cooperative voids. In fact, he was the only prisoner that willingly turned himself in. His backstory was interesting as well, and of the few we actually knew about. He used to be a prolific, merciless Brazilian cop who patrolled the most dangerous parts of Rio. It was so much so that he earned a reputation amongst the criminal underground as the Reaper. But he was still only human. During one fateful mission, his entire unit was massacred during an ambush attack by about a dozen distinct gangs who were all unified under the same goal of taking him down. He was the only survivor, but was captured in the process. After being brutally tortured in a warehouse for about 5 hours, the lights suddenly went out. During this period of darkness, The only sounds entering his ears were those of carnage. Every single gang member was being obliterated by some unknown force. At the end of the bloodbath, he could hear footsteps slowly approaching him, before a deep, raspy voice whispered something into his ear. "There's potential in you. Allow me to bestow you with an opportunity." He felt a sharp pain hit his neck before the hidden entity spoke to him again. "Fulfill your duty." And then he passed out. When he woke up, he found himself in his bed, with all the wounds from his torture session just about healed. All wounds except for one, a bite mark on his neck. His appearance had also changed drastically. Pale skin, dark eyes and fangs. He'd heard about the stories, but could hardly comprehend that he'd become one himself. While he couldn't handle being exposed to the sun anymore, he found himself with superhuman strength and regeneration, which he used to brutalize criminals at night as a vigilante. However, it didn't take long for him to go too far. One night, he went into a frenzy, breaking into the house of a suspected rapist and killing everybody inside. Everybody, including the rapist's innocent mother and daughter. His resolve in regards to justice had never wavered, remaining strong no matter what he went through. For that reason, he could hardly live with guilt on his conscience, and walked to the police station he used to work at, turning himself in to his former colleagues that all thought he was dead. Of course, the news spread quickly. That's when the CIA stepped in and transferred him over to the chasm. He put up no resistance. In fact, he deemed the chasm a place where he 100% belonged. Safe to say, he was a rather bizarre case. We still put him at a low hurricane, same as Hugo. On the monitor, I could see Cale's lips moving. Wanting to hear what he had to say, I began looking around to see if I could get some audio. It didn't take too long for me to find the volume control panel, which was located right under the middle desk. Thankfully, whoever set this weird place up took the liberty of labeling each switch with its respective monitor. I turned the volume up right in the middle of Cale's spiel. "Dangerous scum. I'm gonna have to dispose of you all before it's too late." Hugo's face remained expressionless. Scum. An apt description of the ones residing in this place. "But I understand that you're also a man wrought with unforgivable sin. I'll treat you no differently," he responded. Cale chuckled. "Wouldn't expect you not to." He took a provocative fighting stance.
Small Englishman.
"Let's settle this." Hugo put a hand on his blade cross, before muttering another prayer to himself. He looked up at Cale, his eyes now a deep crimson. "The atrocities I commit are only in the pursuit of ultimate holiness. I hope you can understand that." Cale grinned. "Yeah, I get it. Crazy people are crazy." As he finished the sentence, he rushed forward in a quick blur, sinking his fangs into Hugo's neck. In turn, Hugo grabbed Cale's head and twisted, snapping his neck in what had to be the most gruesome manner feasible, before plunging a fist into his chest. For the first time, Hugo grimaced. "What's wrong with your heart?" he asked, before retracting his hand, revealing severe burn marks. Cale twisted his head back into place before shooting Hugo a bloody grin. "I couldn't tell you, buddy." They traded blows for a few more minutes, pummeling each other into oblivion. While Cale was certainly more skilled and had more tools at his disposal, Hugo possessed more raw power. Eventually, it came to a standstill. Cale had suffered upwards of 20 fatal injuries, forcing his regeneration abilities to the brink. Hugo was bleeding all over, had about 6 bone fractures, an eye gouged out and an ear ripped off. "You're pretty fucking annoying, aren't you?" Cale rasped out. Hugo bent over, coughing up a mouthful of blood. "Likewise." In the meantime, their confrontation had drawn an audience. Coming in from an intersecting corridor was Infernal Gladiator, 6 feet 7 inches, 200 centimeters, 285 pounds, 129 kilograms. He was a high hurricane. Imagine an extremely buff zombie that was perpetually burning, clad in ancient gladiator gear. That was him. In one of his hands, he gripped a gigantic, flaming sword. In his other, he held 2 leashes, both holding respective voids at the neck, crawling at his feet like dogs straight from hell. One was the freak 6 feet 10 inches, 208 centimeters, 253 pounds, 115 kilograms, a slouching humanoid monster with strange, flickering eyes and a grin that wrapped around its entire head. The other was the humanish centipede, 6 feet 4 inches, 193 centimeters, standing height, 372 pounds, 169 kilograms, a centipede-like creature that had a vaguely human face covered in 6 eyes, with an iron muzzle obscuring the mouth area. It crawled on 10 colossal, veiny arms. They were both mid-tornado tier, not incredibly powerful. They were merely simple, aggressive beasts that possessed nothing but primal bloodlust and strength that was comparable to 3 wild bears put together. For that reason, they were easily converted into disposable weapons by the much stronger and more intelligent gladiator. "Fucking hell," Cale said upon seeing the trio. "That's fucking disgusting. Bloody abominations," Hugo added. "Nothing but creatures that stain this earth." They both looked at each other and nodded, an explicit sense of mutual understanding between them. I suppose that a few of the voids teaming up should have been inevitable. "Oh boy, this is heating up," I said, turning towards Sondhu. He didn't respond at first, instead looking as if he were trying to focus on something that wasn't the screen. "What the hell's the matter?" I asked him. "I think there might be somebody else in here. Don't turn around. Just keep watching. Pretend like you didn't hear it." He replied, hardly above a whisper. "It's not like I had to pretend." "Hear what?" I thought to myself. Nevertheless, I'd never sonned who more serious. I turned my attention back to the monitors, while forcing my ears to be alert. About 10 seconds later, I heard it. It was soft for sure. I wasn't surprised that I hadn't noticed it up until that point. Somewhere in the darkness behind us, somebody was definitely trying to contain a giggle. Just ignore it. It was a job easier said than done. And honestly, was it even a good idea? In my head, I ran through the list of potential voids that could have been lurking behind us. Of course, none of them were really ideal, especially not the rowdy clown, whose laugh sounded hauntingly similar to the one we were hearing behind us. And then we heard it again, louder this time. I muttered a barely audible "fuck" in response. Realistically, if it did turn out to be one of the voids, putting up some kind of resistance would have been pointless anyway. We were as good as done for. With that logic in mind, I turned my attention back to the monitors, hoping that whatever the hell was behind us would stay put for a bit longer. In the meantime, Hugo and Cale were about to fight the gladiator and his minions. "Hey, Englishman," Cale said. "You regenerate quickly?" Hugo sighed, stretching his neck out. "First of all, don't call me that. It's rather crass. And no, not much faster than the average man. But no matter. God has ordained me a holy commission. He won't let me die until I've fulfilled my duty." Cale just laughed. "You're a real piece of work, British boy. Let's see if your God helps us make it out of this." "You two aren't who I'm looking for," the gladiator bellowed, before releasing both leashes. "Take out the trash." The freak ran about 6 steps before having his face caved in and neck subsequently snapped by Hugo. In the meantime, the centipede began crawling towards Cale. "Who the fuck created this thing?" he asked, shuddering slightly. The centipede lifted itself up, swiping 2 of its arms at the visibly disturbed vampire. Shit, don't touch me, he shouted before kicking its face, removing its muzzle in the process. He regretted that decision instantly. The centipede had 4 or 5 rows of spike-like teeth, with a horde of flesh-covered tentacles squirming out from its mouth. One of them grabbed Kale by the leg, dragging him down. God damn it, he shouted, attempting to squirm out of the appendage's grasp. Nevertheless, Hugo came to the rescue, turning the centipede's head into mush with one vicious stomp. He shot Kale a cold gaze. Take his name in vain again, and our temporary alliance is over. Kale shook the tentacle remnants off of his leg, his face still utterly disgusted. Yeah. Holy fucking shit. This is nasty. And then they both stared at the gladiator, who was grinning something malicious. Congratulations. You two have earned the privilege of being my combat slaves. I would literally rather fucking die. Kale responded. I submit myself to God and God only. Diseases like you shall perish at his will. Hugo added. The gladiator drew his smouldering sword, which must have been the size of a person. Then so be it, he roared. The two rushed him simultaneously, attempting to bury the burning menace with a flurry of quick strikes. But that wasn't the best idea. They couldn't even touch the gladiator without suffering from burns themselves. Kale sighed. Some asshole just had to dig this fuck up, didn't they? The gladiator stepped forward, unleashing a big swing that singed a few hairs off of Hugo's head. Bastard! He shouted before sending a hard cross at the gladiator, shattering his chestplate armor in the process. You're pretty strong there, Brit. We just might win this one. Kale grinned. Like I said, God will give me enough strength to overcome these trials. Hugo moved towards the gladiator with a seemingly unwavering resolve, his eyes shining a bright crimson. His face was wrought with such intense, stoic determination that I nearly forgot his ultimate goal was to commit global genocide and began cheering him on. The gladiator sneered at the challenge, swinging his blade once again. This time, Hugo deflected it with an elbow, cracking the metal while doing so. He followed up by directing a flying hook kick at the gladiator's jaw, managing to rip it off completely. Kale followed up by biting into the gladiator's shoulder and tearing a large chunk off, burning most of his face in the process. Ugh, he said, spitting out the charred, undead flesh. Not my cup of tea. Are you all right? Hugo asked, staring at his scorched face. Yeah. Should heal up in no time. However, the gladiator was relentless, letting out a frenzied roar before bolting towards Kale. He managed to dodge most of the gladiator's blows, only taking the full brunt of his last punch. Still, that one blow was enough to form a deep, fleshy crater in his torso, while also sending him flying into the steel rail, causing it to bend. Fuck, Kale stammered out, staring down at the unsightly wound. Nope, that's not good. Gonna take longer to heal. Hugo exhaled. The situation has become bothersome. He went back after the gladiator, sending a ruthless barrage of strikes his way. There was an evident skill gap between the two voids, with Hugo landing about 90% of his attacks. On the other hand, the gladiator only managed to land 3 or 4 clean hits of his own. Nevertheless, each of one of them dealt far for damage than any of Hugo's. After about a minute of fighting, Hugo's left arm was completely mangled. His right ribcage had been shattered, and the entire right side of his face was burnt. The gladiator had also taken a fair amount of damage, but not nearly enough to even slow it down. Kale groaned as he attempted to insert himself back into the fight, but that task wasn't an easy one. He could hardly move with his torso just about completely destroyed. I suppose this must be my final trial, Hugo said, somewhat solemnly. What the hell are you talking about? Cale asked, still groaning, and then, for the first time since we began watching, Hugo smiled. God wills it. Using his good arm, Hugo removed the upper section of his robe, revealing a pale, mutilated, scar-ridden body beneath. He muttered another prayer, before looking up at the ceiling, tears now swelling up in his eyes. "Thank you," he muttered. Along with his eyes, the scars on his body suddenly began glowing a deep red. "Tricks won't be enough," the gladiator thundered, before swinging his blade at Hugo's neck. I don't think that I managed to catch exactly what happened next. However, I was certain that I was about to see a head rolling. Instead, the gladiator's blade shattered into what looked like 1,000,000 pieces. At first, I didn't even notice the gaping hole in the gladiator's chest. "How did you?" The gladiator was interrupted by his neck being brutally cranked to the side. As the flaming behemoth dropped, so did Hugo. By then, Cale had regenerated to the point of being able to walk. He stumbled over to the near comatose bishop. "What the fuck was that?" he asked, half grinning. I detached myself from my earthly limitations, an egregious sin, but I needed to fulfill my holy mission. "Well, shit. That's pretty cool, I guess. Not your psycho mission, but the whole detachment thing." He held out his hand in an attempt to help Hugo get up. However, Hugo shook his head in response. "This is far as I go. Not something I can recover from. I only have judgment to face now." "Oh, shut the fuck up," Cale said, picking up Hugo's limp body and lumbering it over his shoulder. "We'll find you some painkillers, and then you'll be back on your feet in no time." "Why would you help me?" Hugo asked. "You understand what I'm after, don't you? My ideals. Well, I don't think I could have handled the gladiator on my own, so I guess I owe ya, you crazy fuck." He looked over at Hugo and grinned. "And who knows? Maybe you'll learn something. Yeah, there's a lot of scum in the world, but there's also a lot of beauty. We don't have to destroy it all. That's..." Hugo passed out before he could finish his thought. Still carrying him over his shoulder, Cale took off running down another corridor. I did a quick sweep of the other monitors. Satanbart had taken out 2 more lower-tier voids, while Morgie was engaged with a high hurricane void named the Mechanic, 6 feet 5 inches, 196 centimeters, 270 pounds, 122 kilograms. Like the name suggested, he was a large, burly man in a mechanic outfit that enjoyed obliterating skulls with blunt tools. Real ruthless guy. On another monitor, the undead Nazi had just finished slicing the shit out of the devil nurse, who was a mid-tsunami. So that's 12 down, I thought. 20 left. The shit show wasn't anywhere near done. "Check it out," Sondhu said. "There's still 4 voids who haven't escaped yet." Sure enough, he was right. First off, there was the Titan, 15 feet 7 inches, 475 centimeters, 1,438 pounds, 652 kilograms. A colossal entity with destructive capabilities that were nigh impossible to deal with. It was humanoid, with an immensely muscular frame further accentuated by the fact that there wasn't an ounce of fat on its entire body. Its harder-than-steel skin was reddish and cracked all over, with a road map of razor-like veins bulging out at every square inch. And then there was the face. It had 6 sets of glowing blue eyes and a mouth full of fangs with exposed gums that were caustic to the touch. His holding cell, if you can even call it that, was a bit more fortified than the rest. I'm under-exaggerating, of course. It was fortified to goddamn hell. No electronic locks connected to a central system either, which is probably what caused the breach to begin with. Good thing too. He was a low asteroid. The next one up was the warden, 8 feet 7 inches, 261 centimeters, 435 pounds, 197 kilograms. Ironically enough, this guy apparently used to run a prison of his own. What kind of prison that might be was beyond me. He had pale white skin, shadow-like eyes and long, slicked-back silver hair. His trench coat was long and perpetually bloody, sweeping the floor as he walked. I've heard stories about the guy. Supposedly, he killed upwards of 700 prisoners during a breach at his prison, managing to come out unscathed from a devastating explosion afterwards. He was as dangerous as a void could get without being considered asteroid, tier, being a high earthquake. Funnily enough, his cell was wide open, with guard bodies and destroyed mech suits littering the space. But instead of getting up and walking out, he simply sat, expression devoid of anything at all, like it usually was. Obviously, he was up to nothing good. The next one was quite the doozy. The strongest void in the entire chasm. In fact, it went by a simple moniker, the Calamity of Earth, or just the Calamity for short. Its gender was unknown, height and weight unknown, appearance unknown to everybody except for the top officials overseeing this entire fucking operation. Hell, we didn't even know where it was kept. The only thing we had to monitor was a simple panel containing 3 lights. Green, safe, still contained. Yellow, breakout in progress. Evacuate immediately. Red, breached. Too fucking late. What did we know about this thing? Nothing, save for the fact that a breach would most likely result in a global catastrophe. Of course, it was a high asteroid. The only high asteroid, in fact. And then there was the last still captive void. But unlike the 3 overpowered monsters I've already talked about, he was a lot different. The kid, 5 feet 6 inches, 168 centimeters, 142 pounds, 64 kilograms. As his name implies, the kid was just that, a kid. From his appearance, he couldn't have been much older than 16, 17 at most. The only thing we knew about him was that he apparently had extraordinary, undisclosed abilities. Abilities he used to slaughter his entire village back in Kerala, India. But who the hell knows what actually happened? To me, and nearly every other guard, he just seemed like your average, meek teenager. In fact, we rarely ever exercised caution around him. Unlike the rest of the voids in here, he just did as he was told, always with this incredibly sullen expression on his face. I suppose that I can't blame him, given the circumstances. We didn't even bother putting a threat level on him. Nevertheless, we were instructed to keep him there. There's a lot of stuff going on here in the chasm that us guards don't quite understand. I make no reservations about that. I know for a goddamn fact that not everything we're not doing any saintly work here. Do a lot of voids in here deserve to be locked up? Not even. They deserve to be wiped off the face of the earth. I never understood why we bothered holding the more malicious ones, using taxpayer money just to keep them alive. And then there were the ones who I wasn't quite sure belonged here at all. Did they even do anything wrong? Who knows? But one thing was for sure. They were different. Exceptional, I guess. The subjects of state curiosity. I always tried suppressing these thoughts. I mean, who the hell was I? Just some random fucking guard. Not some arbiter of morality. Still, fuck it. This is not the time. So let's see. What happened next? I turned to face a random monitor, trying to take my mind off of the kid. I caught what appeared to be the middle of a fight, with the 2 combatants being Jack the Ripper, 6 feet 1 inch, 185 centimeters, 170 pounds, 77 kilograms, the infamous serial killer. Apparently, He'd performed some arcane ritual while on death's door that granted him an extended lifespan and superhuman strength in exchange for what was left of his already dwindling humanity. He hardly resembled a human when we caught him, with a mouth full of sharp, rotting teeth, eyes sunken beyond reason, and a face riddled with cuts, burns, and various infections. He was quite the sore sight to behold. At that moment, he was once again on death's door. The person who put him there, Bella Vauquelin, aka the Bloody Painter, 5 feet 5 inches, 165 centimeters, 122 pounds, 55 kilograms. Despite looking more or less like a normal woman, she was a brutal assassin that wasn't too concerned with the aftermaths of her jobs. After killing her target, she'd paint a bloody picture on the walls. Sometimes she'd supplement her art with a few organs. She wasn't incredibly strong, but that didn't matter all too much. She had this obscure ability where she could summon blades out of thin air at the tips of her fingers, and then use some Esper-like ability to shoot them off in rapid succession, almost at a machine gun-like rate of fire. She had no problems reducing her targets to mincemeat, the ones she really disliked, that is. When we finally captured her, she maintained that she only killed the ones that really deserved it. However, any chance of appeal, not that there was a chance to begin with, was shattered when she punctured the throats of 4 guards. She still claims that it was an accident to this day. Do I believe her? Well, it's about 50/50ths with me. Like I said, she had Jack on the ropes, with what must have been over 100 blades planted firmly within the killer's body, including both of his eyes. Still, he had yet to give up as he swung Wirehead's bat. He must have picked it up, blindly and wildly around him. Bella wasn't unscathed herself, though. It looked as if she'd taken a couple of pretty bad hits to her ribs and thigh. In addition to that, she had a gnarly bite mark on her hand. Nevertheless, she smiled as she pointed her finger like a pistol at the frenzied Jack. "Profiter de el offer," she said, before blasting the killer to shreds, finally ending his grim legacy. Once she was done with that, she let out a loud sigh, clutching her ribs and wincing in pain. Unlike most of the other voids, she wasn't capable of taking too much punishment. After walking for a bit, she came across Luz. While still badly mangled from his confrontation with Wirehead, he was walking again. I didn't even know that he could regenerate that quickly. The two stared at each other for about half a minute before Bella stuck out her hand and smiled. It was a risk for sure. But while Luz didn't reciprocate the smile, he cooperated, accepting the handshake without electrocuting her. Another team-up, and one that I wouldn't necessarily have expected. I did another quick sweep of the monitors. Morgie had taken out the mechanic, although he was limping now, and his next fight wasn't going to be an easy one. He was a few steps from coming across Satanbot. In the meantime, and funnily enough, the undead Nazi was about to square off with the sadistic Soviet, 6 feet 2 inches, 187 centimeters, 215 pounds, 98 kilograms, low earthquake tier. Instead of being zombified like the Nazi, he was more mechanical. More specifically, he was about 60% robotic, with his human bits slowly beginning to rot away. The surgeon was engaged in a bloody duel with Spider-Man, 6 feet 9 inches, 206 centimeters, 225 pounds, 102 kilograms. Unlike Peter Parker, this guy was basically just a large tarantula with human skin and a half-human head. Kale and Hugo were in the medical center, with the former tending to the latter's wounds. I thought about everything for a second, trying to run the numbers through my head. There were 4 more voids who had definitely escaped that I hadn't yet seen on any of the monitors, but I was really only concerned about 2 of them. You see, within the chasm, there were 4 asteroid-tier voids in total. Only 2 of them were still contained. The problem was rather obvious. Beyond that, there were now 14 voids dead, for who still haven't joined the fight. 14 currently active. All 4 asteroids still in play. 3 high earthquakes as well. TFVNH likely on their way. Holy fuck, I thought to myself. The real fight hasn't even started yet. A bout of sudden, raucous laughter nearly gave me a heart attack. I looked at Sondhu, but his face was dead serious. That meant shit. With everything that was going on, I completely forgot about the elephant in the room. But sure enough, they were finally ready to reveal themselves. As footsteps began emanating from the darkness behind us, I braced myself for whatever horrific entity we were surely about to encounter. But instead of that, it was an unfamiliar guy that looked to be in his mid-20s with messy, dirty blonde hair dressed in a Hawaiian shirt and khaki shorts. He was probably around 5 feet 10 inches, 178 centimeters, 130 pounds, 59 kilograms, soaking wet. What the hell? Sondhu said upon seeing him. The man continued laughing as he strolled towards us. "Oh man," he blurted out in between chuckles. "There's shit in both of your pants right now, isn't there? Don't lie to me." Well, the joke's gone on long enough. "Who the fuck are you?" Sondhu asked, sounding somewhat agitated. The man put his arms up in an ostensibly defensive manner. "Relax. I'm just an observer here." But his bloodshot eyes seemed to bulge out as they wandered over to the monitors. "It looks like the preliminaries are over. Time for the good shit. I'm so sorry. I forgot to introduce myself." The man stepped towards us with a gaze that I can only describe as volatile. Perhaps, in the moment, he had no ill intent, but there were volcanoes behind his eyes. Volcanoes that looked ready to erupt at any damn point. For that reason, I found myself slowly backing away, but not Sondhu. For whatever reason, he stood his ground, facing the strange man without reservation. I suppose it also helped that he was 6 feet 4 inches, 193 centimeters, with a considerably larger frame. "The name's Adrian Nyquist," he said, his voice nearly shaking with some kind of obscure excitement. He held out his hand, but neither of us bothered with the niceties of the introduction. He sighed. "What is it me?" He lifted his shirt collar, taking a whiff. "Oof. You gotta shower more, Adrian." And then he started laughing again. "But can you blame me? I've been busy dash." "Who the fuck are you?" Sondhu insisted. "And don't just tell us your name again." "Okay," Adrian said, smirking. "Big guy. Scary stuff, really. What'd you bench?" 3 plates and a bit." Sondhu opened his mouth again, but was interrupted. "It's fine, though. I'll go ahead and explain myself. I mean, the whole situation is kinda weird." "Yup," I responded. "Just kind of." Adrian sat down on the floor and let out a big puff of air. "I don't really want to go too in-depth here. I don't enjoy talking about myself, so let me drop the bomb on you first. I caused the breach." I nearly swallowed my tongue. What the fuck do you mean?" "I meant what I said. I let all the prisoners out." "But, what, how?" I stammered out. He tilted his head back and groaned, before pretending to type on an invisible keyboard. "Just a little hacking, man. Nothing crazy. And they say that you'll never use the skills you learn in school in real life." "Oofed. Hacking," I responded in disbelief. "But why?" "Well, that's where it does get a little crazy. Now, have you ever hopped dimensions?" "Have I ever fucking what?" "Alright, I see you're uninitiated with the concept. Well, unlike hacking some corny lock system, the logistics there really do get complicated. I'll admit that I don't 100% understand it myself, but I understand it just enough to have some fun." I was at a complete loss. I'm a jumper, that's what they call us, he chuckled somewhat goofily. Still a novice, but at least I'm out there doing it. Living life, you know? Anyway, the multiverse is massive, obviously. A lot of crazy worlds out there, just waiting to be explored. But, he paused. I made a mistake last month. You see, I was watching some brutal big stakes fighting tournament called the Evisceration Championships on a planet called the Hell's Cape. Real fucked up place, but drugs laws are mostly unenforced there, so you know. It's alright, I guess. Anyway, I'm up in the stands, 12th row, just blitzed out of my fucking mind on Astro Coke. It's like regular Coke, if regular Coke was actually good. He blew his nose into a disgusting handkerchief. But sometimes you make some bad decisions when you're adduced. I guess school taught us something else, huh? Long story short, I made a deal with some fucking sketchy intergalactic gang leader named Bones the Fourth that I'd provide him a fighter that would guarantee him a win for the next tournament. But obviously, I was just talking shit. Not sure why the guy believed me, an Astro Cokehead of all people. He burst out laughing again. I'll never understand the rich. Okay, I responded, barely comprehending what I'd just been told. Assuming that what you just said is all true, and that you're not completely fucking bonkers, why don't you just tell the guy that you don't have a fighter? Well, Adrian made a whoopsie gesture with his hands. The guy paid up front. A metric fuckton of intergalactic currency and about 22 kilograms, 50 pounds, of Astro Coke. Then, just go to him and give it back. All right, Mr. Self-Control, teach me your fucking secrets. Look, I've blown all the money. I still have a few kilograms of Coke though, for a, rainy day. I'm not sharing, by the way. So, what the hell? This whole thing's some fucked up tournament to you? You're just gonna drag the last void standing to fight in these evisceration matches. Well, it's less of a tournament and more of a haphazard free-for-all. I'm no logistics expert, after all. I didn't know what the hell I was supposed to say to the guy. If you're behind this breach, then you're responsible for the deaths of hundreds of guards. Hundreds of good men. Sond who coughed. Most of them good men. Adrian rolled his eyes. Yeah, okay. Real loss, huh? I'm just trying to live my life here, man. You're insane. Look, did that comment get us anywhere? You feel better now after stating the obvious? No reply from Sond who. Adrian sighed. Look, can we just enjoy the show now? What's done is done. He was interrupted by Sond, who tried to tackle him to the ground. The man did know his jiu-jitsu, but no luck. He couldn't even get Adrian to budge. I saw the veins in his forehead bulging as he apparently exerted all of his strength trying to subdue the strange, lanky man. Shit, he said through gritted teeth. This guy's strong. Adrian simply pulled out a pack of cigarettes, looking completely unbothered. You know, I've taken a lot of strange drugs from a lot of different dimensions. One of them was bound to be a steroid. Also, he began grinning like a maniac. I'm no stranger to training. Wouldn't survive out there if I was weak like you guys. He picked Sond who up by the collar and gently tossed him back. Given the circumstances, I'll forget that you just tried attacking me. Now, why don't we just sit tight and watch? I held up a hand. One last question, if you will. Adrian rolled his eyes and groaned like a child. Come on, we're missing the good shit. But fine, hurry up. The last void standing. They're bound to pretty strong, right? Adrian nodded. Stronger than you? Well, no shit. I'm not trying to grab some chump. Okay, so how the hell are you gonna convince them to come with you? These prisoners aren't exactly reasonable. Adrian stared at me with just about the stupidest look on his face for around 10 seconds. Well, you know what they say. He cracked his knuckles. You just gotta live in the now. You're an idiot. Would an idiot get this far? The idiot had a point. If he really was the mastermind behind the breach, then the guy had some wicked skills, but at the same time, his common sense was close to non-existent. Whatever, I'll figure it out when the time comes, he said. In the meantime, he shot us both a rather menacing glare. Let's enjoy the damn show. I locked eyes briefly with Sondhu. I understood why he was angry. I was too. However, the situation was really beyond helping. We could only as we were told. While we'd been talking, the Nazi had defeated the Soviet, although he did suffer gruesome injuries from the bout. A portion of his gas mask had been shattered, revealing a rotting jaw underneath. In fact, his entire body had been pummeled to a near pulp as he struggled to limp along the rails. Adrian grunted. Great. We missed the World War II rematch. I hope you guys are happy with yourselves. The guy really was like a child. A really capable, psychotic child. In other news, Satanbart had blown up Morgie, along with an entire corridor, while the surgeon had made a surprise discovery after disemboweling the spider's abdomen. It was filled with about 200 smaller humanoid spiders that began swarming him. It was hard not to shudder at the sight. Bella and Luz looked like they were still trying to find a way out, while Cale and Hugo had encountered the rowdy clown. 7 feet 8 inches, 234 centimeters, 177 pounds, 80 kilograms. Rowdy really was something else. His appearance didn't just make you fear clowns and the carnival. He made you fear life itself. An impossibly tall, skinny and pale ghoul-like humanoid dressed in a bloody, dirty 1960s clown costume, with twitching, twig-like fingers and cracked, red lips enveloping a mouth filled with sharp, sticky black teeth. And then there was the fact that he had no eyes and 2 thin, bleeding slits for a nose. I really do wonder what kind of god could have created such an entity. But he wasn't terribly strong, only being a mid-tsunami. Rowdy spat a mouthful of dark, gooey spit at Cale, dissolving the right side of his face. Ugh, Cale muttered, trying to wipe the ungodly substance away, only to pull apart bits of his flesh and muscle in the process. Just nuke this fucking place. Rowdy began cackling like the hellish fiend he was, swinging a lead balloon attached to barbed wire right at the still-injured Hugo's head. However, Cale managed to intercept it at the last moment, breaking his own hand in the process. Suddenly, a pair of giant bat-like wings sprouted from his back. He flew towards Rowdy, before drop-kicking his head clean off. That seems like something you should have used earlier, Hugo remarked nonchalantly. You know I would, but doing so makes me feel pretty gross. I decided to check back on the surgeon, but he was gone. Oh, fuck, I muttered, as I began seeing the black haze around me. I felt a cold hand on my shoulder, followed by a high-pitched, slimy voice that oozed its way into my ears. You got me out of a real sticky situation there. Hesitantly, I looked up at the surgeon's cold, dark gaze as he grinned like a maniac down at me, and then his neck was twisted a full 360 degrees. As he dropped, Adrian let out a big breath of air, stretching out his knuckles. Guy broke the rules. No running from a fight. Besides, he was weak. Wouldn't have stood a chance in the evisceration matches anyway. Is he dead? I stammered out, looking down at the limp surgeon. Yeah, Adrian responded. I shook my head in disbelief. But we've put sniper bullets through his temple. How did you? Adrian shot me a smug grin. Like I said, y'all are just weak. Now keep watching. Things are getting interesting. A few moments later, the Nazi came across the remnants of the spider and its hatchlings, torching them to ashes without hesitation, allowing me to breathe easier. Immediately after taking out the spider, he crossed paths with a chattering man, 5 feet 11 inches, 180 centimeters, 145 pounds, 66 kilograms, mid-earthquake tier. As much as I hated sympathizing with Nazis, the guy couldn't seem to catch a break. Resembling a horribly slouched humanoid, the chattering man was the kind of creature that parents told their kids about in an attempt to scare them into being good. Each and every one of his limbs were jagged and contorted, covered by thin, borderline translucent skin that was still inexplicably bulletproof. His eyes were covered in a damp, bloody and dirty cloth, while his long, black, matted hair swayed wildly as he twitched around. And then there were his teeth. They were giant, about twice the size of a normal human's, and coinciding with his name, rapidly and constantly chattered like hell, yielding one of the most disturbing sounds imaginable. Adrian slammed his fists on the table in excitement. Yes, this is a matchup I've been waiting to see. The chattering man stared the Nazi down, his teeth rattling together like a frenzied, demonic drum. The Nazi responded by abruptly engulfing him in a sea of flames. However, the chattering man simply walked through it completely unscathed. I could see the Nazi clench his jaw in apparent frustration. He drew his knife and rushed in, attempting to engage him up close. The chatterer was surprisingly fast, dodging each slash, before biting down on the Nazi's flamethrower tank. The subsequent explosion flung them both into the air, destroying a good portion of the Nazis back in the process. On the other hand, the chattering man only suffered a few cracked teeth. "Holy hell," I muttered. Truth be told, I'd never actually seen the chattering man in action up until that point. Perhaps we'd been low-balling him on the threat scale. The Nazi let out a hoarse scream, before rushing back towards his disturbing opponent. He managed to sink his blade into the chattering man's shoulder, before being blindsided by a swipe to the face, completely shattering what remained of his mask, revealing his full, zombified visage beneath. The chattering man surged his head forward, biting a large chunk of the Nazi's face off, causing spurts of dark green blood to explode everywhere. He followed it up by ripping an arm off, before savagely beating the undead Solitaire with his own appendage. The Nazi attempted one last stand, grabbing the knife that was still lodged inside the chattering man's shoulder, carving a large gash that extended down to his ribcage. Nevertheless, his admittedly impressive run was finally over. Not seeming to acknowledge the wound at all, the chattering man plunged 2 bony fists into the Nazi's chest, before ripping his torso in half. Quite the gruesome display, for sure, but Adrian seemed to revel in it. He let out a raucous cheer for the victor. What the fuck is wrong with this guy? I thought to myself. Tossing that thought aside, it became apparent that things were beginning to come down to the wire. Cale and Hugo had found themselves within the vicinity of the dancing guy, 5 feet 7 inches, 170 centimeters, 155 pounds, 71 kilograms. He was an ordinary-looking, albeit racially ambiguous man in his mid-20s with short, light brown hair and a perpetual 5-foot o'clock shadow dressed in a plain white t-shirt and track pants. He always wore a pair of unbranded earbuds connected to an MP3 that never seemed to run out of battery. And of course, he never stopped dancing. He was a mid-asteroid, the 3rd strongest being within the entire chasm. Hell, it's entirely possible that he actually is the strongest. We've never seen him fight against the top 2, after all. So just how the hell was such an ostensibly innocuous man so dangerous? Who the hell knew? Like most of the prisoners, he was truly beyond explanation. If I had to classify him, he'd 100% be chaotic neutral. He had no conception of good or evil, no sense of right or wrong, no goals.
No ideals.
The guy just wanted to dance, and he sure as hell was a menace while doing so. Yet, he would never go out of his way to bother you. You just had to stay out of his. He could disintegrate people just by touching them. He'd simply dance through your body, leaving nothing but shreds of flesh and blood behind. And if you ever tried stopping him, oh boy, you see, his eyes were always closed when he was dancing to the music funneling into his ears. If that music ever stopped, then he'd be forced to open them up, and then all hell would break loose. He'd go on a rampage until he got those earbuds back, and nothing could take him down in the process. Nothing. For that reason, it was better to leave him undisturbed, allowing him dance to his heart's content. For that reason, his holding cell was the largest, giving him plenty of room to do so. Fun fact: he listens to many genres, but his favorite is EDM, specifically melodic trance and hardstyle. But now he was out. Bad news for everybody, and Cale knew it. "Shit," he muttered. "We're not dealing with that." "Why?" Hugo asked. "Is he strong?" Cale nodded. "More than you know." "Then that's all the more reason why we need to eliminate him," Hugo said, attempting to crawl towards the dancer. But before he could make the biggest mistake of his life, Cale scooped him up and began running the other direction. "Let's not do that." "Yeah." "The big boys are coming out." Adrian's abrupt shout nearly shattered my eardrums. I glanced over to see which monitor he was looking at, and then I understood his excitement. Satanbot had come across his next opponent, but it wasn't one he was going to have such an easy time with. Standing opposite of him on a walkway on the very top floor was Long Wu, aka the Mechanical Menace, 6 feet 9 inches, 205 centimeters, 375 pounds, 170 kilograms. He was a mid-asteroid, right in between the Calamity and the Dancing Guy in terms of estimated strength. He was actually a special case. You see, he was originally held in the Chinese equivalent of the chasm, known as the well. However, as a political favor, a complicated exchange, mind you, the US allowed the PRC to transfer Wu over. This was shortly after he'd killed 400+ guards and nearly escaped entirely. They just really didn't want to deal with him anymore. He was also interesting in the sense that he wasn't born with any supernatural abilities or superhuman prowess. His danger came from his brilliant, but unhinged mind and his obsession with the concept of transhumanism and being the change that shifts humanity into a new, technological age. His original, progress-driven ideals could have been deemed noble at some point, but then he went off the deep end with power and decided to prove just how much better we could be once we'd fully integrated ourselves with technology. And how did he decide to do this? By trying to kill anybody and everybody he saw. His power came from his suit, which he'd apparently semi-fused with his own body. It was comprised of a dark, unidentifiable metal that had so far proved to be unbreakable. With it, he had a vast arsenal of devastatingly overpowered weapons at his disposal. Machine guns, shotguns, explosives, knives, you name it. Both of the eyes on his helmet were also capable of firing railgun blasts. But his most powerful weapon was something he called the Singularity Blade. That weapon was where the science ended and the fucked up shit began. Being about 5 feet, 152 centimeters, long and glowing a deep ember, this sword was an enigma. I'm not sure how he made it or what he did to attain it, but it sure as hell wasn't the result of any kind of engineering. Any time that he swung it, a sharp, ear-splitting roar could be heard from everywhere and nowhere at once. And then, from the tip of the blade, some kind of ghost-like serpent-esque entity would emerge, utterly annihilating everything in the area with its flames, fangs and claws. You could only see it for about a second, and most guards were under the impression that it didn't even exist. But it does. And it's haunting. They're gonna destroy this place. Sond who said? Adrian pulled an old-looking pack of peanuts out from his back pocket, stuffing a handful in his mouth. You got that right, he shouted, spitting crumbs everywhere. Wu took the first offensive, unleashing a typhoon of bullets from a chain gun that jutted out from his chest. Satanbot managed to dodge every shot, closing the distance between them in the process. Both of their movements were incredibly hard to follow, of course. Once he got close, he attempted to strike Wu with his tail, only to have it blocked by a large shield that abruptly materialized from his forearm. Wu attempted to slice the tail off with a large axe, but Satanbot managed to evade the blow at the last second. I suddenly understood why he was so dangerous. Unlike Satanbot, whose weapons were already fixed on its body, Wu's suit was capable of adapting to any situation, morphing its robotic appendages into whatever weapon was best suited to countering his opponent. Jesus Christ, I muttered at the realization. This guy's a fucking monster. Even though Satanbot had managed to dodge that strike, the next one would prove more difficult to evade. In a borderline flash-like movement, Wu threw a Muay Thai kick at Satanbot's side, piercing it with a spike that protruded from the tip of his foot. He finished the combo by transforming his fist into a tool comparable in appearance to a meat grinder, drilling it into Satanbot's shoulder, tearing an arm off in the process. Adrian groaned. And here I thought the devil robot was going to put up more of a fight. But he spoke too soon. After taking the hit, Satanbot was already on the counter, whipping his tail around to strike the side of Wu's head. Wu recoiled slightly, still managing to destroy one of Satanbot's knees with a railgun blast as he staggered. He was about to finish the job when a large cannon materialized from Satanbot's torso. A hidden, last-stand weapon, I suppose. From the barrel, it fired out an immense blast of purple energy that Wu barely had time to dodge as it scorched the side of his helmet. It blew a gigantic fucking hole in the fortified ceiling, causing sunlight to leak in. Keep in mind that we were also about 100 feet, 30 meters, underground. But Wu didn't give Satanbot any more time to reveal any further tricks, blasting its body to bits with a brutal spray from an automatic grenade launcher. It seemed as if Adrian was about to pass out from the excitement. "That's my boy!" he shouted. "Fuck bones. We're gonna win this whole tournament ourselves." What I hadn't noticed was Bella and Luz watching the whole encounter from behind cover. Bella's eyes lit up upon seeing the hole, a rather convenient escape route. She ran out from her hiding spot, before leaping an extraordinary distance into the air, right towards freedom. But then, out of nowhere, a massive armored hand grabbed her by the neck. From the surface, a gigantic man dressed in a streamlined mech suit of a model that I wasn't familiar with dropped down, landing hard on the walkway. He continued to nonchalantly strangle Bella as he surveyed the scene. "What a mess!" His booming voice reverberated through the monitors. "It's time to enforce justice." If Adrian was giddy before, he was off the rails now. "They're here. They're finally here. It's time for the semi-fucking finals." "Who the hell is here?" I asked, already somewhat knowing the answer. "The Alpha Boys and Girls. The Apex Predators," he responded. "Task Force Void Nova Hammer." To be continued.